Hello viewers, welcome to K Diagnostics. Dio here. Today we have a 2005 Hyundai Elantra with a 2.0 liter. The complaint on this vehicle is the car is losing power tremendously. The customer stated that the car is barely going over 35 miles an hour. So the vehicle is really slow going down the road. The fastest it can go is 35 miles an hour. So there's definitely something wrong with this vehicle. The customer also said that there are no lights on the dash. The check engine light is not on and the transmission light is not on, so there are no lights on the dash. And when I brought the vehicle inside the shop, I confirmed that there are no lights on the dash, but the vehicle kind of drives a little funny. So what I want to do is I want to take this vehicle for a spin. Let's take this for a test drive and see how the vehicle drives. If we cannot go over 35 miles an hour, then we're going to connect a scan tool to the vehicle to see if there are any pending codes in memory. If there isn't codes in memory, then we will maybe look at some data pads and get directions about how we can go to fix this vehicle. So now come with me so we can go on a test drive and see how this vehicle drives. Alright guys, so we're gonna test drive this vehicle so we can confirm the customer's complaint. So I'm gonna start the engine. So right there, the engine is running and the check engine light remained off while the engine is running. So that's good. So let's take this for a spin. Actually, before we go on a test drive, I want to scan the vehicle to see if we have any pending codes in the engine computer. So let me turn off the engine. Let's turn the key to the on position. I'm gonna get the scan tool connected and then I'll bring you guys back up. So right there, as you can see, we don't have any trouble codes in the engine computer. So now the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna look at some live data. So let's go to live data. Alright, so we have a list of data pads here. So we're gonna select the data pads that will help us fix this problem. So we're gonna look at some fuel trim numbers, so short-term and long-term fuel trim, engine RPMs, so we want that, vehicle speed, okay, airflow rate from mass airflow sensor, yes, we need to look at that, O2 sensor data pad, so the first O2 sensor, and that's the second O2 sensor, this is the first O2 sensor. So that's all. Okay, so we're just gonna show the selected ones. So right now I'm gonna focus on our fuel trim numbers and then the mass airflow sensor data pad. Actually, let's change this value in grams per second. So now I'm gonna start the engine. So let's watch these fuel trim numbers first. Over here at idle we have 2.86 grams per second. So our fuel trim numbers look pretty good. We have 1.6%. It looks like we went up to 6.2% on the short term, and then we have minus 2.3 on the long term. So we are definitely within the plus or minus 10%, which is a normal range on a good working engine. Our O2 sensor, let's look at the O2 sensors. Let's graph them. So I don't like how I have a flat line over here on the first O2 sensor. Okay, this first O2 sensor should be fluctuating between rich and lean, but over here we have a flat line. So it looks like this O2 sensor is not responsive. And the second one is pretty good. A flat line on the O2 sensor after the catalytic converter is not bad, but on the first one, that's a problem. So now let's test drive this vehicle. Let's see if we will be able to drive this vehicle over 35 miles an hour. So I'm gonna put the scan tool over here on the passenger seat. So let's drive this out of the shop. Remember, the complaint on this vehicle is the vehicle cannot go over 35 miles an hour. I'm watching our fuel trim numbers right now. Our fuel trim numbers are good. They are still within the plus or minus 10%. I mean total fuel trims. So let's test drive this and let's see what happens. So I'm gonna floor this. We're gonna go all the way to the floor. So I'm going all the way to the floor right now. It feels like this transmission is not upshifting. So I'm all the way to the floor, and the fastest we're going is 25 miles an hour. As you can see, I'm flooring the accelerator pedal. So the engine speed is over 3,000 RPMs right now, and the vehicle speed is around 20 miles an hour. And as you can see, the vehicle can't even go over this little hill over here. Watch this. I'm actually flooring the accelerator pedal. I don't know if I can show you my foot over there, but I'm way down to the floor. So this engine is got something wrong. Okay, so I'm recording all the data on the scan tool. When we get back to the shop, we will look at the recording of the data and see what's going on. So I'm driving at different RPMs. We will analyze the data when we get to the shop. So I just lowered the engine RPMs, so right there. So now I'm gonna floor the accelerator pedal again. As you can see, the fastest we can go is 20 miles an hour. It feels like this transmission is not upshifting. There's a noise I'm hearing. I don't know if you can hear that noise. It sounds like there is a hissing sound coming from under the hood. It sounds like when you have a turbo that's leaking. If you have a leak in the inlet side of the turbo, so the suction side of the turbo, I know this vehicle doesn't have a turbo, but that's kind of what it sounds like. It sounds like this vehicle has a leak somewhere, okay? I don't know if it's a leak on the intake, but it sounds like a leaking turbo. It's like when you have a leak on the inlet side of the turbo, you know, on turbocharged engines, when you have one of the seals or maybe a clamp between the turbo and the intercooler, if you have a leak like that, that's kind of the sound it's making. Listen. I don't know if you can hear it, but right there, I'm going all the way to the floor. Right there. And the vehicle cannot go over 20 miles an hour. So that's good. We have confirmed the customer's complaint. So now let's drive back to the shop. All right, so we're back at the shop. I'm going to turn off the engine. So let's bring up our scan tool. So here's the scan tool. I was recording all the values over here while we were driving. Okay, so now let's click on review. So let's scroll back. We're gonna play this. So let's pause this. We're gonna analyze this data at idle speed first. So over here at 700 RPMs, our fuel trim numbers were good. So we had 2.3% on the short term and then minus 2.3% on the long term. So this is good. And our mass airflow sensor data PID was 3.74 grams per second. Let's analyze this again at a higher RPM. So let's pause there. So at 2000 RPMs, so 2392 RPMs, our fuel trim numbers on the short term was minus 12.5%. long term was minus 2.3%, and then our mass airflow sensor was 36.02 grams per second. This is low at this kind of engine speed because the mass airflow sensor measures the amount of air that enters inside the engine. At this engine speed, because at higher RPMs, the engine inhales more air than at idle. So this speed over here, this value we have, is too low based on the speed of the engine. Knowing that we are losing power, a high engine speed against a low value on the mass airflow sensor tells me that we most likely have a clogged exhaust. So it means this engine is not inhaling properly, because if we have a clogged exhaust, the burnt gases inside the engine are not escaping from the tailpipe while they're just stuck there and going back to the combustion chamber. Well, that will prevent the engine from inhaling fresh air. Okay, so it's like the engine is being choked right now. So let's play this one more time. So let's pause this. So over here at 3,171 RPMs, our mass airflow sensor value is 38.6 grams per second. This is too low, guys. This number should have been higher at this engine speed. This is too low. Yeah, this is not looking good, guys. Minus 29.7% on the short term at 2,400 RPMs is too much. Okay, and this is caused by a defective exhaust system. I mean, a clogged exhaust system will do this, and our mass airflow sensor value is too low. This value should have been higher than this. Okay, so this is a telltale sign of a defective or clogged exhaust system. I mean, I shouldn't say defective, clogged exhaust system. So knowing that we cannot go over 25 miles an hour, the engine is losing power, there's no check engine light on, we have low mass airflow sensor values at high RPMs, have high negative numbers on the short-term fuel trim at higher RPMs, that tells me that the issue is the exhaust, a clogged exhaust. So we're gonna check that really fast. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go under the hood, and we can do it two ways. We can remove the O2 sensor and put a pressure gauge in the O2 sensor hole, and we're gonna start the engine to see if we will have high pressure in the exhaust system. The other test we could do is we can use a pressure transducer inside the cylinder to see if we have a restriction in the exhaust system. Actually, the other method is what I'm going to use. We're going to use an in-cylinder pressure transducer to see if we have a restriction in the exhaust system. Okay, now let's go under the hood and do that. Alright guys, we're going to use an in-cylinder pressure transducer to check for a restriction in the exhaust system. So I got my pressure transducer connected. So my lab scope is connected and ready to go. I removed the spark plug. I installed the compression tube on the cylinder. My pressure transducer is connected. I got my 5-volt box connected to the battery. I also disconnected the injector because we don't want the injector spraying fuel while we're doing the test inside the cylinder. So I am grounding my spark plug wire over here on the strut tower through this spark tester, so that way all that energy coming from the coil is not going back to the coil to destroy it. Okay, all that energy is gonna go down to ground. Okay, so now I'm going to start the engine so we can look at the pattern on the lab scope. So I will sit you guys over here. I'm gonna go inside the vehicle and start the engine. Rev it up. So I'm going to turn off the engine Alright, so the engine is turned off. So now let's see what we have on the lab scope screen. So now we're gonna analyze the data. Alright guys, so we have captured some data on the lab scope. So now let's analyze the data. Okay, so this over here is our top dead center. Okay, so our towers peak to peak look good, and the exhaust plateau over here looks high to me. Okay, so this over here is too high. This should have been around halfway of this peak. So this tells me that we have a restriction in the exhaust system. Actually, let's use our zoom feature and zoom out a little bit more. Do you see how high this exhaust plateau is? This over here is an indication of a restriction in the exhaust system. Okay, this over here is too high. At higher RPMs, this should have been pretty much halfway, okay, of this plateau over here. So let's throw some cursors here so we can read the value of the peak pressure. Let's just use the first cursor right there. So cursor number 1 is reading right there 46 psi. So 46 psi on cursor number 1, which is really high. Okay, so this exhaust system is restricted. Okay, so that's pretty good. We have found out that the exhaust system is restricted. Now the other test we could do is we can use a pressure gauge on the exhaust system to measure the restriction in the exhaust stream. We can do that by removing the O2 sensor and feeding a pressure gauge on the hole where the O2 sensor goes. Then we're going to start the engine to see if we will have higher pressure in the exhaust system. So if you don't have a lab scope, I'm going to show you how you can do the same test with a pressure gauge. I will get the pressure gauge connected and then I'll bring you guys back up. Alright guys, we're gonna do our last test before we make a definitive call about a restriction in the exhaust system. So if you don't have a lab scope, you can use this pressure gauge to check for a restriction in the exhaust system. So what I did was I removed the O2 sensor. Ideally, you want to connect your pressure gauge on the hole of the O2 sensor before the catalytic converter. So I removed this O2 sensor and I connected the fitting of this pressure gauge on the hole of the O2 sensor. So we're gonna start the engine and watch the pressure in the exhaust stream. Okay, so here the rule of thumb is we shouldn't have over 1 psi of pressure in the exhaust stream. Okay, at idle we should have less than 1 psi, and when we increase the engine RPMs around 2000 RPMs, we shouldn't have over 3 psi around 2000 RPMs. Okay, so you can use a manual gauge or a pressure gauge if you don't have a lab scope to do the same test. Okay, it can just be tricky sometimes if you have a rusty O2 sensor, or if your O2 sensor is at a very difficult location to get to. That can be tough to get to the O2 sensor and install the pressure gauge. I'm doing this because removing the O2 sensor on this vehicle is pretty easy. I mean, the first O2 sensor on this vehicle is pretty easy, but on V8 or sometimes V6 engines, getting to O2 sensors can be really tough. So the lab scope will be the best way to go. But I'm just going to show you both tests in case you don't have a lab scope. This also works just fine. So I'm going to go inside the vehicle and start the engine. Alright guys, so I got my engine started. So let's watch the gauge over here. Oh wow, do you see this? This is abnormal. I'm sorry for the glare, guys. Do you see that? So this is a lot of pressure in the exhaust system. So right there, we definitely have a restriction in the exhaust system. So I'm going to increase the engine RPMs. So let me set this in a way that we can also see it as I'm increasing the engine RPMs. So watch. Wow. So we actually buried the gauge when we give it gas. So let me see if I can see it right there. So watch the gauge. I'm gonna increase the engine RPMs one more time. Yeah. So we definitely have a restriction in the exhaust system. Wow. So right there, our exhaust system is restricted. So this is how you use a manual gauge, okay, attached to the O2 sensor hole to check for a restriction in the exhaust system. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the engine. This is pretty definitive. We're gonna put the vehicle on the lift so we can see where the restriction is. So now I'm gonna go inside the vehicle and turn off the engine. All right, guys, we are under the vehicle. Here is our exhaust stream. So this is our downstream O2 sensor. There is our catalytic converter. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to remove this down pipe, okay? So I'm gonna undo these two bolts, this one and that one. And then I'm also gonna remove the bolt on this flange. So we're gonna remove this pipe. Since it's not really hard to remove, we're gonna get this out. I'm gonna disconnect this O2 sensor. Once I remove the pipe, we're gonna see in there. We will see if this catalytic converter looks good. If the catalytic converter up here looks good, we're gonna check down there to see if there's a restriction around that other cat over there. It looks like that's a catalytic converter also. Okay, so I'm gonna remove the down pipe and then I will bring you guys back up. So now let's get this down pipe removed. Alright guys, so now we're gonna inspect the exhaust system. So let's check this catalytic converter first. So let's look in there. Wow, do you see that? That's not good. This catalytic converter is completely empty. There are no substrate in this catalytic converter. So where did the substrate go? This is not supposed to be empty like this. We're supposed to have substrate in this catalytic converter. So it's basically a hollow tube right now. There's nothing in the middle of this catalytic converter. So I believe the substrate on this catalytic converter went down to this exhaust pipe. Okay, so the pipe is clogged. So all the substrate over here, so the substrate that's supposed to be here that converts the harmful gases that the engine produces into safe gases is no longer there. Okay, so now what I want to do, let's just do an experiment. Let's check this and see if anything is gonna come out of it. Oh, there you go. You see all this stuff? Oh my goodness. So this is our restriction right there. Okay, so if we look in here, I don't know if you will be able to see, but I see a lot of stuff. Woo! Wow, do you see all this stuff? So this is what was causing the restriction. Yeah, so basically we're gonna have to replace the catalytic converter up there, and this down pipe also has to be replaced. Okay. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna replace this down pipe. As you can see, these over here are the substrates that came out of the upstream catalytic converter. Okay, so we're gonna replace this whole tube. I'm pretty sure there's still a little bit of substrate trapped here, because when I'm looking inside there, so the substrate over there still looks good, but you know what, I'm not gonna risk it. I'm going to replace this exhaust pipe. The entire pipe is gonna be replaced, and then we also gonna replace this catalytic converter up here. Okay, this catalytic converter has to be replaced. Once we put the new catalytic converter here, this vehicle will start driving well. It will no longer lose power, and our restriction on the exhaust system will be gone. Now, after replacing the catalytic converter and the downpipe, what we have to do is, after replacing those components, we have to look at our fuel trim numbers and make sure the engine is running right. We have to double check that and make sure the engine is not running rich or lean, because we gotta find out why this catalytic converter went bad. Okay, so I will get these catalytic converters. I'm gonna get this one up here and the downpipe. I'm gonna replace them, and then I'll bring you guys back up. So I will do that, and then I'll bring you guys back up so we can verify our repair. Alright guys, so I replaced the catalytic converter and the downpipe. As you can see, everything looks nice and shiny. So I'm gonna lower the vehicle so we can verify our repair. If we made the right call, there shouldn't be any restriction in the exhaust system. So now let's lower the vehicle. Alright guys, so I have lowered the vehicle. So now I'm gonna start the engine. So let's start the engine. Alright guys, so right there, as you can see, we have our waveform pattern on the lab scope screen. So let's check the gauge first. That's good. I'm gonna increase the engine RPMs and see if this gauge will move. Remember, before at idle, this gauge was fluctuating between 3 and I believe 5 psi. So watch. So the gauge is barely moving. I don't know if you saw that. So that's good. That tells me that there is no restriction in the exhaust system. So that's good. Basically, at this point, we can call it, okay? So let's do our last analysis on the lab scope screen, and then we will take this for a test drive. So I'm gonna go inside the vehicle and rev it up. It's misfiring right now because we have one injector disconnected. All right, so I'm gonna turn off the engine. So let's go under the hood and analyze the data. All right, so look at the value of cursor 1. So cursor 1 now is reading 18.3 psi. There's a huge difference right now. Now, this psi value over here is not accurate because I'm not using snap-on pressure transducers. That's why this is not going to be accurate, okay? I am using an aftermarket 5-volt box, and I'm using a ATS pressure transducer. So the reading over here is not going to be 100% accurate, but you can tell the difference now. And right now we are down to 18.3 psi. Okay, so there's a huge difference between the pressures we have now and the pressures we had before. And we saw how clogged the downpipe was from the substrates of the upstream catalytic converter. Okay, I mean, this waveform over here definitely looks a lot better. So right now what we're gonna do is I'm gonna get the tools out of here. I will tighten everything back up. I'm gonna reinstall the O2 sensor. Where is the O2 sensor? It's somewhere over there. I'm gonna reinstall the O2 sensor, and then we're gonna connect a scan tool to the vehicle to look at the data. I'm gonna look at our fuel trim numbers, our mass airflow sensor data PID. Remember, the mass airflow sensor data PID was low at higher RPMs. So right now, with the exhaust system replaced, our exhaust system is no longer restricted. Our mass airflow sensor data PID should be higher at a higher RPM, okay? Alright, so I'm gonna remove all the tools. I'm gonna reinstall the spark plug, and then I'll bring you guys back up so we can analyze the data feeds on the engine computer before we wrap up this video. So this looks good. Based on the reading that we have on the pressure gauge and the lab scope, I can already tell that this vehicle will drive a lot better. So let me put everything back together and then I'll bring you guys back up. So the engine is running. The engine actually sounds really good. Alright, so now we're gonna press record. We're gonna record all these data feeds, and then we're gonna take the vehicle for a test drive. So let's record this. So now let's drive. Remember, before, this vehicle could not go over 25 miles an hour. So I'm gonna drive it. Let's see if the power is gonna be restored. So let's drive outside the shop. Alright guys, we are on the road, we are driving. Guess what? The vehicle is now going over 25 miles an hour. Remember, before, this vehicle could not go over 20 miles an hour. Well, this vehicle is fixed. Okay? So let's give it gas a little more. So right there, we went all the way up to 60 miles an hour. So this is fixed. The problem on this Hyundai was a clogged exhaust. The exhaust system was clogged. So that's why this vehicle could not go over 25 miles an hour. Alright guys, so I'm gonna drive back to the shop. I'm gonna turn off the camera. I will bring you guys back up once I get to the shop so we can wrap up this video. This is fixed. So I will drive back to the shop and then I'll bring you guys back up. Alright guys, we are back here at the shop. The vehicle runs great. So right now, our fuel trim numbers look good. Our idle speed is good. Okay, so this is really awesome. Look at our mass airflow sensor value. We have 2.5 grams per second at idle. So this is good guys. This is fixed, okay? I mean, our engine is not running rich, it's not running lean, so this is good. Yeah, so this is awesome guys. This is good. This vehicle is fixed. So I'm going to turn off the engine so we can wrap up this video. Alright guys, so that's it. I'm gonna leave it right over here. This vehicle is fixed. The problem was a clogged exhaust system. So the catalytic converter went bad, so the substrates inside the catalytic converter broke, and then they went down to the downpipe and clogged the exhaust system. So that's why this vehicle was losing power tremendously. This vehicle couldn't go over 25 miles an hour. Okay, so that was the problem. We fixed it, we diagnosed it, we figured out what was the problem, we replaced the catalytic converters, so now everything is good to go. We also analyzed the data after the repair to look at our fuel trim numbers to make sure that the engine is not running rich or lean, because if you have a rich running engine, it's going to damage your catalytic converters again. You can replace 10 catalytic converters. If you don't fix the cause, the concern will be back. So that's why I test drove this vehicle with the scan tool connected to the car to see if this engine is running good. And the engine is running good. Everything looks fine. Our mass airflow sensor value is good. Our fuel trim numbers are good. Our O2 sensors values are also good, so we're good to go. This vehicle is fixed, so I can give this vehicle back to the customer knowing that this issue is not going to come back again, and this vehicle is not misfiring. The other thing that causes a catalytic converter to not last is a misfiring engine. So this engine is not misfiring. It runs great now. The vehicle has power, so this is fixed. I'll call the customer so she can come and get her car back. So I will leave it right over here, guys. I hope you like this video. If you do like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why so we can make better videos in the future. If this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.